Hey, 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 this is APBio, final chapter review. Yeah, say hi, say hi. Final chapter review, conservation of biology, conservation of biodiversity, yes.
Are we taking the beginning or the end?
At the beginning, and then we'll do our lab.
Oh, great. That makes it
easy. Yes, it does, it does. Okay, so I think this chapter is fairly straightforward about biodiversity. And our goal is to first identify what biodiversity is, right? Then we talk about the value of biodiversity. Then we talked about how man screwed up biodiversity or is in the process of screwing up biodiversity. And then we say, how can we preserve the biodiversity we have and restore the biodiversity we've lost, right? That's what you want to think about it. So there's a few things you want to know the difference between. I would start off by knowing the difference between a threatened species and an endangered species. Which one's worse?
endangered.
Good. Then we talked about the importance of three types of biodiversity. So I would have those in my head, right? So one, genetic biodiversity, is we're saying like, when you look at one organism that you want to have variation in their genes. Now you could have it so much so that it's like a subspecies, right? Okay, so you want to have biodiversity in the DNA. Are you running some off? And you're offering to run mine because you love me so much. I love you so much. And you're in my review that I'm recording. Yes, you may take everything.
I just want this.
Okay. Okay. All right. So genetic biodiversity is within a population, right? You want to have, or within a species, you want to have diversity. And why would we want to have that diversity? Yes?
You're more likely to survive.
More likely to survive, yeah. You have some adaptations in your back pocket, right? Then we talked about MVP, right? We talked about minimum viable population. And so when we talked about that later in preservation too. Remember we talked about gap analysis, and you need to look to see how much land space, how many ecosystems are they living in. If you're going to make them viable, there needs to be a large enough population so that you're avoiding inbreeding, right? And we talked about community biodiversity. Okay, and the idea there, so you want to have variation in your populations, go one step up. What comes after population? Community, right? Population, community, and then what? Ecosystem. Those are your three biodiversities that you want to have. Okay, population, community, and ecosystem. Where is it? There it is, landscape diversity. All right, that's easy peasy. We talked about hotspots. Off the top of your head, think about what a hotspot is.
Place where there's
It's really hot.
Es muy caliente.
Muy caliente. Catalonas en fuego. No. What is it again?
No, it's where you have like a bunch of species.
Right. So if you're going to pick places to stay, get the most bang for your buck, right? Get that where you can preserve the most species. And especially species that are endemic, like that's the only place where they are, and if you lose them forever. There's not another source for that species. Okay, then we went into values, and we compared that there were direct value. Show me the what?
Money.
Yeah, it's usually something to do with money, financial. So there are direct values and indirect values. And we said direct values are things like medicines. We want to keep biodiversity, could be a source to help us. Just think selfishly, right? This could help me in the future. That's why I'm preserving you. You might look altruistic, but really you're not. And there are some examples there. Then we talked about agricultural value. Because when we only grow one crop, which we tend to do, and then we're at risk. Because if you have some pest of that crop and we don't have any other crops that we can use to replace that, then we could get kind of hungry. And last but not least, we talked about consumptive value. So we said MAC, right? For what's the MAC stand for?
Medicinal agriculture.
Yeah, medicinal, agriculture, and consumptive, right? So medicinal are medicines we need, agriculture is food we need, and then consumptive could be anything where you're going to use something, rubber from the trees or whatever. Okay, so those were the three reasons why we would want biodiversity that's direct, that's obvious. Then we talked about all the indirect values that you don't always notice. Things like keeping ecosystems in balance, maintaining those biomes. We talked about the importance of how we could use them in waste disposal. We talked about forests being sponges, holding water, preventing what? Yeah, soil erosion by having those species there. And then also like the process of erosion, not only is that bad, but usually it has secondary effects in some other like body of water wherever it erodes too. And then we talked about climate regulation. Cities tend to be like urban, what do I want to call it? Urban heat islands. They generate a lot of heat. And so that's why they're looking to green up cities and put plants and trees on tops of buildings and layers and embedding that in order to make it not be so hot. And then ecotourism is another one. Okay, then we said, all right, so we know what biodiversity is. Review with me right now. What were the 3 types of biodiversity? Genetic, landscape, and what was the other one in the middle? Community. Good. Then we talked about direct values. What were our direct values? Medicinal,
agricultural,
and consumptive. Good. Then indirect values. Let's just say some indirect values.
geochemical,
waste disposal, prevention of fresh water,
Ecotourism. What's also-
regulation.
Good. Okay, you got it. Then we said, all right, let's see how man screws that up. Well, so how do we reduce biodiversity? Well, we have things become extinct. So what is the main #1 cause of extinction? Habitat loss. Good. Okay, habitat loss. And that's involved, do you remember about how much it's involved in?
85%.
Yeah, that seems like a lot to me, right? Now, would I go, okay, habitat loss is involved in 85%, so that means only 15% is left? No, why?
Because it
They overlap. Did I ever push start? Yeah, I did. Sweet. Okay. So habitat loss was our #1. Then what was next? Exotic species. Good. So this is when you take non-native organisms, bring them, any kind of organ, if it's alive, we bring it to a new place, and it hasn't evolved in that location. So there's no predator-prey balance, right? It hasn't had to compete with other organisms to be there. You just dropped it off. It's kind of like somebody coming into the school that doesn't go to the school and they're playing on your team, right? They haven't had to compete all the way through or something like that. So these are dropped in. There's no protection against it. What's #3?
Pollution.
Pollution, okay? And pollution could be all, remember we talked about there are all kinds of pollution out there? Well, let's name some kinds of pollution. Acid rain. Eutrophication of bodies of water. What else? Ozone depletion. What else? Organic chemicals getting in our water. Remember we talked about like nonylphenols and things like that that are affecting the way salmon are being able to osmoregulate and go between fresh and salt water. Or they mimic hormones. What else? Global warming. Organic chemicals we just said, yes. Okay, so what was the first one again? Habitat loss, then exotic species, then pollution, overexploitation. So we're assuming we're exploiting. We're jumping up to the overexploitation. What is one main way we've overexploited? Fishing. Okay, and what was the last way? Disease. Okay, so you want to be just familiar with that. We looked at several different ones about habitat loss, and okay, and then we talked about these broken barriers where they're either purposely brought or accidentally brought into an area. I told you about Magic School Bus. We talked about food webs, especially being susceptible to this because we don't always understand the interconnectedness. So trying to be helpful, bringing in shrimp, ending up decimating the population of several different ones that you're actually trying to preserve. We talked about islands, especially being under threat, right? We talked about, we went into pollution, acid rain. I think you hit them all. I'm so proud of you. You did. And then guilt. Okay, overfishing, disease. Perfect. Okay. Then we said, all right, what are we going to do about it? And there were 2 aspects to it. How did they do? Lots of noise.
Smarty McSmarty pants.
Awesome. Thank you. Could you please grade my group sessions too?
No.
Be a problem?
Yeah.
You know, if you were a real friend, you would do that for me. Just kidding.
Did you hear that? I just did this really nice thing for her.
I'm kidding. I love her very
Only
much.
once more.
Wait. Is there a key or just I'll do it in my head? I usually just do it in my head. The group
Yeah,
one.
there's not a key.
Okay, I'm good. It's in my head. I got it right here. Steel trap. Okay. Habitat preservation and habitat restoration. And we talked about things like preserving those hot spots. We talked about a keystone predator. This is like a linchpin. It's the, do you know what a keystone is? It's really interesting. Yeah. I only know because I went to a bar and it was called Keystone. And so, with Miss Chevalier.
Oh.
And we Googled it, because we wanted to know why it was called that. And it's a stone, like let's say in an arch, that kind of keeps everything in balance. It's built off of that stone. So you remove the keystone, everything falls apart. So that's why keystone predator, that's somebody who keeps everybody else in check, okay, is the keystone species. We talked about, hey, preserve the things that they have posters about, flagship species, then maybe you will, secondarily, you'll be preserving several other organisms' habitat. Remember we talked about source and sink? Don't let a source population become a sink. Yeah, you want your R to be a positive number. Yes? Okay. And then we talked about you can't just preserve like one area. You need to look at all the ecosystems and where they're interacting and preserve all of them. Really big deal is about edge effects, right? Because it's the different amount of light, different amount of sound, different temperatures all along the edge. They can't necessarily cross the edge. And the more we fragment up our ecosystems, we make small little islands, which then you have increased extinction and decrease in overall biodiversity.
I have a quick question.
Yes, go ahead.
So having like a large edge, like the 88.8%, that's bad, right? You
Yeah.
don't want the edge.
Right. So the thickness of the edge, like if I were to use like a ruler here, right? The thickness of the edge is the same on all of them. We should go in metrics, right? The thickness of how it is on all of them is exactly the same. But because it's a smaller piece, it's taking up more of the overall section, that edge.
Okay.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So that's my little island.
Right, yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay.
Like if this room, imagine this room, right? If the thickness of the edge of this room was one computer, right?
Yeah.
And it went all around the edge, then it wouldn't be taking up that much space. But if the room is as big as 4 desks, then the edge is taking up a lot of that space. Surface area to volume. Okay, yes?
Is the edge effect created by us fracturing it off?
Yes.
That's what causes
Yes.
those different lights?
Well, you're always gonna have an edge, right?
Yeah.
The forest doesn't go on forever, there's an edge to it. But if you make a road in the middle of the forest, you can see all the pretty animals, and even though you can't shoot them, as soon as you put a road in the middle of it, you're creating an edge. You've just fractured it. Yeah. Okay, and then, so we looked at those fragmented environments and things like interfering with it. We looked at little bridges or tunnels and all those kind of things interfering. So we want to make sure we analyze and look to see where's the way we can be the most effective, right? Oops, sorry, whoops. And look at population viability analysis. What does it take to keep that species alive? How much space do they need? How many ecosystems do they need? What kind of transport do they need? Are we doing man-made availability of resources, or are we doing it on a natural cycle? Okay? And then we said, last but not least, if you're going to restore something, we talked about 3 things. Do you remember on your head, if you're going to restore something back to its natural state? Do you remember the 3 things you wanted to do? Yeah, okay. Each of you say one. Go ahead.
Immediately so that we don't lose them.
Right. Start now because we're losing them all the time. Make it sustainable. Perfect. Boom. Mic drop. Perfect. Okay. Those are all the things you want to do when you're trying to restore a habitat, and act quickly, mimic it, and make it sustainable. And then there are examples of that in the Everglades where that's exactly what they did. Yay for you. I'm happy for you. Don't forget to send me those questions. I'll probably use them. On the minimum number of emails, you should work collaboratively. Send me one document, and I'll go, hey, maybe I'll use those questions. Okay? Don't forget to do your highly suggested reading and thinking.
What if someone comes up with questions that's really, really hard but in a chat person like that?
I wouldn't use it.
Okay.
Because I'd be like, you're annoying. That's what I would say. I'd say, you're annoying. Yeah, it's not about that. Remember the big ticket. I want to make sure they understand the process of it. That's, big ticket. If there's a deets question, I can throw in a deets question. Unless it's one like like a good one is, which of the following are mandatory for restoration? You could list 3 that are there, and then the 4th one, pick something that would be like, you didn't study. Right? A good distractor, like I try to do on those highly suggested.
Yeah.
People are like, oh yeah, that one sounds good. Okay, hope you're not staying up too late. Yes, tomorrow's Friday, and it's a good day to get all the points on this quiz. So hopefully you're hitting the books early, you're getting some good sleep, hopefully you got some exercise in today, maybe a little yoga, I don't know. All right, eat some toast.
You almost